In the Roman Empire, religion was not something set apart from daily life. It was woven into its very fabric. Across vast territories, from bustling cities to rural towns, people honored many gods. The rhythm of religious life felt familiar wherever one traveled. Public rituals brought communities together. Animals were sacrificed at temples. Processions filled the streets, and festivals marked the passing of time. These moments often ended in shared meals, reinforcing both faith and social bonds. Participation was not optional in any meaningful sense. To take part in these rituals was to affirm one's place in society and to uphold tradition. Religion in this world helped maintain order and also served the state. Temples rose in honor of Rome and its rulers. Offerings were made for the emperor's health and success to the empire. Loyalty and worship were inseparable. These public acts of devotion doubled as declarations of political allegiance. For centuries, this system functioned with remarkable flexibility. New gods could be added. Traditions could adapt. The empire absorbed difference rather than resisting it. But in the early 2nd century, Roman officials began to encounter a group that did not fit this pattern. In a letter written around 112 CE, Pliny the Younger, a provincial governor, described them to Emperor Trajan. They called themselves Christians. They gathered regularly, followed their own customs, but refused to participate in the rituals that structured Roman life. They would not sacrifice to the gods. They would not offer incense to the emperor. This refusal was striking. It set them apart in a society where religious participation was a shared expectation. Over time, these communities became more distinct. Leaders such as Ignatius of Antioch emphasized unity among believers and separation from the surrounding culture. Others, like Justin Martyr, went further, rejecting the validity of the Roman gods altogether. This was something new. Roman religion had long allowed for expansion and inclusion. Christianity did not. It insisted on exclusive devotion to a single god, closing the door to the kind of religious blending the empire was used to. And yet, these communities spread. Archaeological remains from house churches like the one at Duriaropos to inscriptions and burial sites reveal networks of believers scattered across the empire. They were not confined to one place or people. They moved, communicated, and formed connections across cities and regions. All the while, the empire itself was beginning to change. The 2nd century marked Rome's greatest territorial reach, but it also brought new pressures. Disease swept through the population during the Antonine Plague. Wars along the frontiers grew more intense. Economic stability began to falter. When Marcus Aurelius died in 180 CE, his son Commodus took power, marking a shift in leadership. Earlier emperors had often been chosen for their capability, adopted into the role. Commodus inherited it. His reign reflected a different style of rule. Less stable, more centered on personal authority. Relations with the Senate worsened, and imperial imagery grew increasingly grand. Coins and statues depicted him not just as emperor, but as a heroic, almost divine figure, often associated with Hercules. After his assassination in 192 CE, the empire entered a period of uncertainty. Power was contested. Stability, once taken for granted, became harder to maintain. This instability deepened into what is now called the crisis of the 3rd century. Emperors rose and fell rapidly. Regions broke away. External threats mounted. The empire, once adept at managing diversity, now struggled to hold itself together. In 284 CE, Diocletian came to power and set out to restore order. He reorganized the empire, dividing authority among multiple rulers in what became known as the Tetrarchy. Administrative systems were strengthened, and efforts were made to stabilize the economy. These reforms aimed to bring consistency back to a fragmented world. Within this effort, traditional religion took on renewed importance. Shared rituals were seen as a way to reinforce unity across the empire. Those who stood outside them became more visible and more concerning. In 303 CE, under Diocletian and influenced by his colleague Galerius, a series of measures targeted Christians. Their meeting places were destroyed, their texts confiscated, and their ability to hold public office restricted. They were required, like others, to perform traditional sacrifices. This campaign became known as the Great Persecution. Yet, even at its height, enforcement varied. The empire was vast, and local officials applied these measures unevenly. In many places, Christian communities endured. Their networks, already widespread, proved difficult to dismantle. Less than a decade later, the approach began to change. In 311 CE, Galerius issued an edict ending the persecution and permitting Christians to practice their religion. Soon after, Constantine and Licinius expanded on this shift. In 313 CE, their agreement, later called the Edict of Milan, granted religious tolerance and restored confiscated property. What had once been suppressed was now recognized. With imperial support, Christian communities grew more visible. Churches were built with state backing. Leaders took on more prominent roles within society. Over time, the relationship between the Roman state and Christianity transformed completely. What began as a point of tension gradually became a new foundation for unity. The empire had first tried to enforce conformity through tradition. When that proved insufficient, it chose a different path, not by eliminating difference, but by being inclusive. However, the fundamental nature of belief had been reframed, and now this new exclusive God would begin to assert control.